And then we're going to have a couple of people present, and then we'll do questions. All right? If you have a question, please write it down, and then we'll put it together. The goal for that is so that we don't ask the same questions over and over. Not that that tends to happen. So if you write the question down, then we'll make sure we're getting everybody's questions answered, hopefully in the time that we have. All right? Very good.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Rather I do this or this? All right, go with that. Most folks don't want my voice under any amplification. As Councilmember Weil said, my name is Jason Batchelor. I am the city manager. I've been with the city about 18 years, including the last 2 to 3 years as the city manager. So it's a great organization, a great community, and I'm proud to lead it and serve in that capacity. So today, here's our agenda. We're going to go ahead and go over current conditions of the number of different data centers we have, land use regulations around those, and those type of issues. We'll then turn it over to Aurora Water to walk us through water usage, regulations we have in place. We have some of our partners from Xcel Energy here to talk about power usage. I'll then come back up, talk a little bit about physical impacts of data centers, and then we'll cover any other factors. That was my cue up there. Is there anything up there that you all were hoping to cover that you don't see up there that folks would like to have covered? Does that basically come? Yes, ma'am.
What legislation do you have in place to watch these?
So we'll cover that in each one of those different areas. So we'll cover that within there.
The issue with the, like, 19 states.
So we'll cover the regulations that are in place in each one of these different areas and in terms of how we monitor that.
Does other regulations include pollution?
We can talk about that. You want to? Yeah, we can talk about that. Okay. Yes. We can talk about incentives as part of that as well. Zoning. Zoning is going to be covered in land use and that piece there. Yes.
We had to submit our questions in advance, so what does the discussion portion look like?
So we'll be going through those questions and doing that there.
Health impacts for those living in the vicinity.
Okay. Talk about that. Oh. Yes.
Including in the fiscal impacts, will there be the cost of around to us constituents for water and power costs?
We can talk about that and when we cover each one of those areas, how we cover our costs of water, how the xcel's utility recovers those costs, and go from there.
Noise pollution.
Noise pollution. Okay, we can certainly talk about that. So environmental, noise pollution, we'll cover that in the other factors there. Okay, sir.
In 1922, Herbert Hoover and his team had planned the water usage, the dams, Hoover Dam, etc. For the best case scenario of the water usage for all the states involved. They never did a worst case scenario. Are you planning to do a worst case scenario of this?
So we will talk to you about that when we talk about water usage. It sounds like you want to talk about water usage. We're happy to talk about that in terms of our planning process.
Okay.
All right, anything else? All right, seeing none, dive into the first topic. So data center zoning. I'm not going to read this to you, but that is in our code, how we define data centers. So that's whenever you're talking about land use, where that is, the first thing you have to do is define a use, and then you go through with where is that allowed, where is it not allowed, and where is it conditionally allowed. So that's how we define data centers in our development code. And then data centers are currently permitted in industrial districts. That's AD stands for airport districts. APZ is airport protection zones, so that's the crash zones for Buckley. And then I1 and I2 are industrial zones. So those are, and then finally mixed use, office, and institutional. Those are the areas where it is an allowed use. We additionally have two mixed use districts, mixed use airport district and mixed use regional district, where they are conditional uses. And under a conditional use, that means there's additional requirements. It has to go to a public hearing, goes to the planning commission, and then it ultimately goes to council if the planning commission recommends it to decide whether or not that's allowed. So again, the top tier are where they are allowed by right, and then those next two are where they are conditional use. If you'd like to know where those areas are, you can go to the city's website, go to maps and look at zoning maps, and the entire zones for all the city are showed. You can see there's different areas where those different zones or districts apply. Current state. So we have 9 active data centers in the city of Aurora. We have 5 that are planned and in various stages of development. So that's ultimately 14, 9 that are active, 5 that are making their way through the process. So that's what we're talking about here. When we get to Aurora Water, we're going to talk about actually what we're seeing in terms of the usage and those things. I will tell you that of the 9 that are active, 5 or 6 of them are within the past few years. We then have about 4 of them that are much older. They're probably up to maybe a couple decades old in terms of those older centers. They've been around a little bit longer. So these are not all within the past, year or 2. These have been in progress for either a couple of decades in a few cases, and then some of the others have been in the last several years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marshall Brown, who's our general manager of Aurora Water, and he's going to walk you through water usage and then the regulations we have in place.
Okay, water usage in data centers. You guys know how much water a data center uses?
805,000 gallons a day.
Okay, they can. Data centers can use a lot of water. They can, depending on how you approach them. So Aurora has been pretty proactive in how we approach large water users in general. So data centers can be a large water user. A number of years ago, we recognized Aurora's water supplies were not unlimited, that they're pretty precious. Most all of us are feeling that pain this year during a drought. So, so data centers' primary water usage is through their cooling systems. If you let them use, or if they choose to use evaporative cooling, they can use a lot of water. And so some of those numbers you threw out, there are data centers around in the West, in the country, that use those volumes of water. Not in Aurora. We do not allow large water uses in Aurora, and it's not limited to just data centers. So again, one of the challenges with the cooling technologies is as you drive water use down, power use does increase. Data centers do use power. So that's a little bit of the balance that goes on in the data center space, is trying to balance water use with power use. So here, again, we created criteria, standards that prioritize low water use. So we've had, and I think we can get into some details if we want, but we've had the newer data centers be very responsive to our regulations. So next slide. So data centers here, we'll talk water use in general. Aurora, the city of Aurora holistically uses about 55,000 acre feet of water a year to meet all of our demands, all of our needs. Data centers, the 9 collectively that Jason mentioned, and all of those are not created equal, but the 9 of them put together collectively use 0.3 roughly percent of our water supply. That's not very much water for a couple of reasons. The older data centers are teeny and have very small footprints, and so they aren't quite as efficient in the water use space as the newer data centers, but they don't process much data, so they don't have very high cooling needs. By rule, the newer data centers have come in under our new criteria and standards, and so they're not using strictly evaporative cooling technologies because they can't meet our criteria if they do. So, to be honest with you, our largest consumer of water in the city of Aurora that uses about 40% of our water supply, who can tell me what that is? Well, not kind of. Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass drinks about 40% of our water supply every year. Data centers, 0.3% of our water supply every year. Just to put things in context. Now that's specific to Aurora. That will vary a little bit depending on where you go, but the water discussion in Aurora is a little bit different. So this is what we refer to as our large water user guide. Council worked with us. They were very proactive in this space. Aurora is the only utility, Aurora Water, that has a guideline like this right now. There are some other protective ordinances that a few other systems have, but nothing quite like this. Colors don't show up extremely well, but this is the criteria we apply to any large user that comes into Aurora. There's a couple of different things in the matrix. One, we look at how much their water demand is, and then most of you probably know Aurora has a reuse system. So we're able to recapture indoor water use and recycle it and use it over and over again. We can't do that with outdoor water use or consumable water use. So evaporative cooling, Kentucky bluegrass, a few other things. If it consumes the water or ships it away, we can't recapture it and reuse it over and over again. So we look at, when a large water user comes, we look at how much water do they need. And then on the top, how much of that is not recoverable? How much can we not get back and use over and over again? If they need very little water and most of it is recoverable, that'll fit into the green and we say you're good to go, come to Aurora. From a water perspective, it works well. Yellow, they start getting into a space where we're going to look a little more closely. The opposite, lower right corner, the kind of blood red, we don't allow those uses. They are too high. So large evaporative cooling facilities or functions fit into that dark red. They don't work here because they're prohibited. This was put in code a couple of years ago by council. It's actually been in our design standards for a few years, even longer than that. So all of our large data centers, which we don't have too many large ones, but all of the large ones have been developed under this criteria, which is why water use is 0.3% of our total supply. Next slide. So this just gives you some general idea of some of our water. That's great. So this is kind of the application of our large water user guide when we look at how many gallons per day, per acre, a facility might need. And you can see here we have, these are generalized a little bit, but you see data centers, DC, those are our 9 data centers. And you can see how they compare to some of our large water users. You can see on the bottom there, we have some large water users that use a lot more water, both from a gallon per acre per day and an overall volumetric perspective than the data centers. The two, DC1 and DC2, are not super efficient with their water use, but they're also the old ones that have been around for a couple of decades, and they're very small water footprints. So again, a small facility on a small parcel, so the gallon per acre per day use is a little bit high, but their overall use on our system or demand on our system is relatively low. I should mention that some of this, on the data center specifically, some of that water use that is counted against them is actually for irrigating my favorite friend, Kentucky bluegrass. So that actually is combined in there with the evaporative cooling. So data centers in Aurora are not large water users because we created criteria, and the data centers that are coming are having to abide by the criteria. I will let you know a few others. You'll hear neighboring entities maybe who've created moratoriums or done things to look at their water use more closely. The day one of our neighbors created their moratorium, I got a phone call asking for our large water user guide criteria and wanting to understand exactly how we created that, how it works, so that they could look at least considering adopting something similar. So Aurora is in a very good place. Again, council's been very proactive and interested in protecting our water supplies. So I think that was the last slide I had. This just compares a little bit. There are some hybrid technologies out there also, so it's not that you'll find just evaporative and just dry. There are some hybrids that will use water somewhere in between. A few of our data centers are some kind of a hybrid that they're more efficient than just evaporative cooling, but they'll have a hybrid system that includes some evaporative components. So the latest ones are going more and more to the dry, non-evaporative closed loop systems that work more like your radiator in your car if you have a car. So,
Can we talk a little bit about the question we had on impacts for ratepayers? So talk a little bit about our connection fee schedule and then our rate fee schedule.
yeah, okay, thank you. Another thing that's a little bit unique to Aurora is our connection fee structure. So water gets to be paid for two different ways. So your bill, which some of our bills have gone up this year because we're in the drought, the monthly bill pays for our operating costs. So the day-to-day costs to operate and run the system, about 80%, about 75% maybe of those operating costs are fixed. They never change, regardless of how much water we push through the system, which is an interesting challenge. Rates pay for day-to-day operational demand on the system. They are volumetrically based, and so you pay per 1,000 gallons of water demand. The other thing that's a little bit interesting with water rates is different customer classes drive the costs a little differently. So single-family residential homes and multifamily homes have a very predictable demand on our system, so their rate, the per gallon charge, which is around $6 per 1,000 gallons, $5.85 I think for tier 1, and that can go up. That predictable portion of single-family residential rates is very low. As you get into higher tiers that capture irrigation needs, because irrigation drives peaking in our system and forces additional costs on us, those rates volumetrically increase. Commercial customers also drive costs a little differently, so they pay a little higher volumetric rate for operating the system. Those costs are kept very isolated and we recalculate those and revisit those every year to make sure each customer is paying for exactly the cost they're driving in the system that we have to cover to operate. Connection fees are the other thing that we collect. So connection fees in Aurora are also not quite as unique as our large water user guide, but they are fairly unique in the industry in that our connection fees here are also volumetrically based. Now, you may hear others saying our connection fees are volumetrically based also. That's kind of true for everybody. Most systems take the meter size and they average the flow for the meter size and they say that's your connection fee when you come. It's the average cost of the volume associated with each meter. We get refined down to, again, the gallon per day of demand that any meter puts on our system. And we charge an amount in the connection fee to purchase that capacity in the system. So while rates pay for operating costs, fees pay to build the system, to acquire the water rights, and create the source of supply system. So they cover our capital costs, the cost to create, build, construct the system. So everybody, when they pay a connection fee, buys into the system. Most of us, when we move into a home, the developer has paid the connection fee. When a business moves in, the business pays the connection fee. To buy in Aurora a capacity in our water system, so they essentially own the right to that much capacity. So again, for us, it's calculated down to the gallon per day of demand. So none of those costs are subsidized by any other of our ratepayers or connectors as far as development fees. They're all very isolated and protected, so everybody's only paying their fair share. Did I miss anything?
I think that covers the ones we need, all right? So we'll let water go until question period, and then we'll go to the next one.
This is, now we have questions. I don't think we have
Okay.
So, if we could have our panelists come up to the front, and we can go through some of the questions that we have, and I'll have them introduce themselves since they're up here. But also, I was a really bad host and forgot to introduce some of our other elected officials who are here. So, Mayor Mike Coffman is here, Councilmember Stephanie Hancock, Councilmember Allie Jackson, Councilmember Rob Andrews, and Representative Mike Carter. So, ask them the hard questions if you have any. They're up for the challenge. So, there we go. And then, yeah, just pick a seat and then we'll have you guys introduce yourselves. And I will. Just want to go down the row and introduce yourself so everybody knows.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I don't know if this is recorded, but I'm going to speak like Jason. My name is Holly Velasquez-Horvath. I'm a regional vice president here in Colorado, and I represent xcel Energy. So I'm happy to talk with you all about anything that has to do with power and.
Jason Batchelor again.
Marshall Brown, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the general manager of Aurora Water. Been doing that for about 14 years.
Michael, I'm Vice President of Operations for QTS Data Centers. We have an operational data center here in Aurora, and we're under construction on 2 others to fit out our final campus.
I'm Chris with QTS Data Centers, Critical Operations Manager for our Aurora campus.
All right, so I have a mixture of your guys' questions here. I also have some that were sent to me. So I'm kind of going to move it around so none of you get bored up there. And I want to ask all water, all power, all that. So we're just going to move around. So the first question is, why don't data centers use green energy?
I can start.
Okay.
We use green energy whenever we can. We're usually buying credits associated to xcel or other municipalities. But physically, there's just not, we don't do enough land to be able to supply enough power of wind or solar generation to do that. So specific to the specific to the Aurora campus, which I'll focus on, is physically the footprint just doesn't make sense. I mean, I can cover every square inch with solar panels, and it would even, it would barely run the basic functions of the facility. So, I think Holly can speak to it more.
Sure, I can speak from a broader perspective. So we serve several data centers around the state. They're very small. They're not anywhere to the size that we've all been discussing as a state and a community for the last 2 years. So we are embarking on a new era and a conversation with our Colorado Public Utilities Commission about what does it look like to serve some of these larger scale data centers. Normal data centers that we've served over the last several decades is somewhere between 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts at the most. And so that is served on our distribution system. These larger data centers, like a QTS, is upwards of 150 megawatts and more. And so it is a substantially different level of power capacity and power that we need to provide for data centers. If they are connected to our electric grid, they are served by the same energy generation that you all are served by as a company. So today, we serve all of our electric customers in Colorado at a 46% renewable and clean energy. And we are still on track in building new wind farms and solar farms on the Eastern Plains to serve all of our customers in Colorado at an 88% carbon-free electricity by 2030. That was a public policy statute that we worked with the state of Colorado to establish, and so our commitment is making sure that we serve over 80% by 2030, and we're on track to do 88%. So if you are a data center and you are connected to the electric grid, you are getting the same. So you are getting that 88% electric generation like every other customer in Colorado.
That leads us to another energy question. So do xcel Energy ratepayers pay for data center infrastructure? And what % of my bill goes to data centers?
Yes, so now, nobody as a customer in Colorado for xcel Energy is paying for any infrastructure for a data center in Colorado, except for the data center. The data center is responsible for paying all of the infrastructure costs, and that includes electric wires, distribution poles, transmission lines, even electric generation that they would require over and above what we are already serving our customers on the system. We actually also, for maintenance and operations, data centers pay for, it's very similar to water. Data centers pay for the operations and maintenance of their infrastructure, and that is not covered by any other customer in Colorado. We are actually currently in front of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, which is our regulator. We submitted something called a large load tariff, and what that is it's a service policy for any electric load that is over 20 megawatts. So QTS or any other data center would have to go through a separate application with our Colorado Public Utilities Commission to establish what infrastructure they are required to pay for and to ensure that none of our other customers pay for any of the infrastructure or the operations and maintenance of the data center and their service.
Here's a question about water. So can we agree to allow data centers only if they're using the closed loop system of water, or do we allow other systems?
Yeah, so we could theoretically say you have to use a closed loop system. We've taken a slightly different approach to drive efficiencies because, again, data centers are not our only large water user. And so we, by creating the large water user guide, we've tried to create criteria that will apply to any large commercial water user. And so we've had some other facilities join us recently as well who have large water demands, and they may have had large evaporative cooling needs. We've been able to apply the criteria and drive their demands down and create water efficiencies within their footprint. So could we? Yes, we could ban evaporative cooling altogether. We've taken a little more generalized approach that we think is protective of our large supplies. I will mention we've had this criteria for about 5 years, either in design standards or in code. We are continually reviewing how it's working, and if we see that it's not working as well as we think it should, or as well as we think it currently is, we can refine it and make improvements that could include some other options.
Great. So some of the locations scouted for data centers are probably located in the rapidly growing areas of East Aurora. That's word 2 if you go there. That's word. How will especially the noise levels be controlled around a large number of houses? So do we monitor the noise levels? Do we test it? Do we require them to? And then how do we make sure that our houses aren't being adversely affected?
I can take the start of that. Where during our permit process, our load calculations on noise are all generated before permits are even issued. They are then tested at full load during commissioning to validate that they are within spec. And QTS specifically prides itself on being a very good partner to our neighbors. We do the utmost we can with screen walling, with insulation, several factors to try to mitigate any sound. We also don't intentionally go near any established communities. That is certainly not our intention. Obviously, it's very disruptive during construction. It's very disruptive to the local community, light sources, etc. So we intentionally push out as far as we can within reason to be able to still get the services, the power, the water, the other services that we will need to be able to support the facility.
And then from the land use side, if you remember back to the slide I had up, those industrial zones, those things that the AD, those are typically, by their very nature, not adjacent to residential. So there's already some removal from those areas. And then that's why those mixed use areas, which does potentially allow for it, those are conventional uses that we can bring in those additional contexts of where is there going to be residential within that mixed use zone? Where is that residential going to be? And we can factor that into those decisions. So that's kind of how it's addressed from a land use standpoint.
Great. And we have a couple questions, they're the same ones, so I'm going to combine. Are tax incentives offered for data centers, and if so, why?
Sure. So we do, from the city, we have issued incentives in the past for data centers. Part of the reason we're doing that is we want to attract that high value development. Data centers are extremely capital intensive. They bring in a lot of property tax associated with those developments. And then that property tax is also refreshed. So when we tax property here in Colorado, we tax real property, so land, buildings, and then in addition, we tax business personal property. So the equipment within the facility that goes to generating that. So particularly within these facilities, they're refreshing their racks, the servers, all that stuff. They're refreshing that every so many years, so that you're seeing that investment come back into the community. So it actually, a lot of times when you get large industrial users, they come in, they build the building, and there's a large initial capital investment, and it's a good investment, and it stays there. It may accrue, value over time, but you're not going to see this reinvestment that you do with business personal property. So the reason we give incentives are we want to attract those jobs associated with it. We want to attract that high value capital investment, so that our property taxes are seeing that. So if you're in a metro district, school district, those are primarily property tax-based entities, so they are definitely seeing the value from those high-value projects with data centers.
Great. And so here's another question, well, a couple. So the first one I'm going to kind of answer. So why the push for these all of a sudden? I actually asked that question myself, and I did tour QTS. I had a lot of questions about kind of like, what the heck, is it all AI? I'm going to date myself for a moment, but I myself have seen war games, back when I was like a kid, and I thought, oh my gosh, what are these things doing, right? Well, then I had it explained to me a little bit. How many people carry around their cell phone with maybe, I might have 10,000 pictures on my phone, maybe possibly. Those are all uploaded to the cloud, right, for storage. Well, I guess I didn't realize, because I'm not a techie person, that the cloud isn't like a cloud. It's a data center, and shame on me for not knowing that, but I didn't know that. So all of the things that are stored in the cloud, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, all of those things that are out on the internet, they have to be stored in a data center somewhere. So, I don't know, maybe I was the only one that didn't know that, but I'm learning as I'm going along. So that's part of the push for them as we demand more internet use, as we're using ChatGPT, as we're Googling things. All of that adds to the need for data centers. So
let me speak to the AI boom overall is driving the big centers. That's no question, right? And I live in this community too. Obviously I share your concerns about somebody moving in right next to me with a lot of power and water usage. However, while the AI boom is in full swing, we see that we're trying to be market leader not only in AI but across the world, because there's a lot of fear out there that foreign nations would surpass us and then be able to attack us in some way. The other thing we're seeing on the data center growth market is most of the facilities, a good proportion of them, were built around the late 90s, early 2000s. So now they're roughly 20, 26 years old or more, that those facilities can no longer handle the loads that they're being asked to do, the smaller markets you see, the smaller data centers here in Aurora. So now those are being refreshed or replaced by new facilities. So we're seeing the turnover in the industry just by normal, end of life procedures.
So what, do we have a full build out for how many data centers the city will allow, or does it just depend on what comes forward? And that question also ties into, they're saying with regards to how Denver has a moratorium, Jefferson County has a moratorium, are we going to limit how many come here to Aurora?
So it's a policy question for council in terms of that one, so I'll turn that back around you, council member. As we said, we currently have those 9 that are active, we have the 5 that are in progress. That's what we've heard of at this point. Our code does not, except for, generally does not allow sort of limitations by use type. So that's something that we would typically see governed either by the market or by some other factors. But it's not something that we've got a mechanism in place currently to limit those numbers.
What you could have done based on the development as it comes in. If you don't like a project, you can still kill the project. It is.
And since Jason turned it back on me, please know that I've been doing so much research over the past month and a half. And so part of that research was wanting to have you guys come, ask your questions, get the details we need so we knew how the community felt about it, so that we could evaluate what we're doing currently. Also look at best practices, right? There are cities out there that have already done some things that we might be able to implement here. I had realtors looking at, one of the questions was, does a data center affect my home value? We don't know. It's fairly new that people have thought about it, right? Little did we know there have been data centers in our neighborhoods for many years, whether it's in the back of a bank or in a strip mall. We didn't know that they were there, but now as they're coming in, they're bigger. We don't really know if they affect home value, so I have different people doing some research in other cities just to see so that we can incorporate best practices to make sure that the community has a voice in what's happening.
Now,
So.
the research QTS has done so far is that it really stabilizes the tax base quite a bit. We've got a large data center in the state of Swanson. And it does help overall property values because it does stabilize that tax rate.
Are there noise limits, and if so, is that monitored?
So there are noise limits in that it does vary by time of day, whether you're sort of during the day when folks are up and about. I don't know the number off the top of my head, maybe you do.
What's our limit on hours per gen a year?
For generators, it's 24 hours for each generator. We cannot run earlier than 7 a.m. We can't run later than 7 p.m.
And so then with that, the way we measure that is Floyd's decibel LDN, so we can measure that at the property limit. That is something that we typically do on a complaint basis. It sounds like our operators are doing that proactively, but if we get complaints, we would go out, measure the property boundary against those.
Yeah, it's that when we go operational construction.
So we just had a question come in and asked about the use of data centers